Oh, I know that sound. It's time for the Beer News Report. Cheers and welcome to the Beer News Report. I got called out on my show 2 weeks ago about the 2021 recession because I said we're overdue for a recession. And my friends pointed out that, hey, we already had a recession and we're going through a K-shaped recovery right now. So we talked about it and I did some research, and yeah, the U.S. currently hit a recession in February of 2020 brought on by the coronavirus pandemic. And we are going through a K-shaped recovery. And I had no idea what a K-shaped recovery was. I had to look it up. So not knowing what a K-shaped recovery was and figuring that maybe you guys don't know either, that's going to be the topic of today's show. Cheers. Now, I'm sure that you've heard of like a V-shaped recovery or even a U-shaped recovery. But what other types of recovery are there? Well, there's three types. There's a W-shaped recovery, an L-shaped recovery, and the current one we're in, which is a K-shaped recovery. Okay, let's make one thing clear. A dip in the stock market does not mean that we're in a recession. I mean, usually the stock market will go down when we hit a recession, but a real recession is based on the economic data. It's a decline in economic activity. A recovery means that the decline has stopped and now we're going up. We're recovering. The economy is building back up. Okay, so let's start with a V-shaped recovery. That's probably the most common. I think everyone knows that one. So what happens is that there's a sharp decline in the economy followed by a sharp increase, making the shape of a V. Just like on this one where the coronavirus hit and we rebounded right out of it. Okay, now a U-shaped recovery is very similar to a V, except that it's not as sharp as an upturn. So what you see is a sharp downturn, it kind of levels off, and then a sharp increase. Okay, and that's making the shape of a U. Now the next one is a W-shaped recovery. So it starts out like a V, right? It goes down, it comes back up, but then there's a second downturn followed by a second upturn. Sometimes this happens because the government does a stimulus package and it tries to get the economy going, but the stimulus only lasts for a short while. And then the economy, because it hasn't fully recovered from the effects that brought on the recession, the stimulus package effects wear off and the economy goes back down. So that's why you see the first upturn and now we're going back down because the economy hasn't fully recovered. Now, once it does, you'll see the bounce and it'll go back up, and that's the second part of the W, right? The economy finally has recovered. It's now building back up, and that's the second portion of the W. The last type of recovery before we talk about a K-shaped recovery is an L-shaped recovery. And what's happening is that the economy was hit so hard that it takes time for it to recover. Businesses go under, people get laid off, and now you need time for the businesses to rebuild and then rehire these people back on, and that's when the economy starts picking back up again. Okay, so that covers all the different types of recovery except for the K-shaped recovery, which we're going to talk about now. Cheers. Now let's first look at the letter K. As you can see, it has a sharp decline followed by a sharp increase, but also a breaking away portion. So obviously this cannot be represented in the stock market. What this means in terms of our economy is that at the beginning, the economy shrinks fast. This is what happened in February when the coronavirus hit. The businesses were shut down, or they were forced to shut down, and that caused unemployment rate to increase dramatically, almost to the levels of a depression. So now as we grappled with the high decline in our economy, and we had to make sure that the businesses were okay, but the community was okay too. Once we figured that out, then the economy started to recover. But this didn't happen equally throughout all the business community. Now, some businesses, like mainly the high-tech industry, they could have their workers work from home. They handled the coronavirus well. In fact, some of them, like Amazon, did even better because people couldn't go to the stores to shop. They were closed. They were shut down. You had no choice but to go online to do your shopping, and Amazon was the main one that got the most of the business from that. Another company that blossomed during the coronavirus pandemic was Zoom Technologies. This company allows you to do meetings via the internet, and you could have all sorts of people talking. You could share your screen so people can see what you're talking about. This technology was perfect for the coronavirus pandemic because it allowed you to work from home and work safely. Its stock has grown fourfold. So I hope some people bought that one. Other companies that I brought up in my recession 2021 show also did fine. As you remember, those companies are the ones that we have to have. So grocery stores, healthcare companies, and utilities. Those all did fine. So what companies didn't do well during the pandemic? Well, let's take a look at these. Cheers. The companies that required people to go into work or to have people close together, those didn't do well. So like the airline industry, they took a major hit. And not only that, because people couldn't fly, tourism tanked. And that affected the hotel industry. So here you see a domino effect with all these companies affecting the other companies. And some of these may actually go bankrupt. Now, because most businesses were closed, people weren't driving, so that dropped the price of gas. And they also weren't using mass transit. So states or cities were noticing that their bus lines, the trains that people used to commute in, nobody was going on them. Those tanked. They were losing money. And you got to keep them running because there are a certain amount of the population that they live off of riding to work on buses or trains. So those got hit really hard. But probably some of the most hardest hit businesses are the small shops, the mom and pop shops. These could be restaurants, they could be gyms, they could be nail or hair salons. These all got shut down and couldn't do business. And they really don't have enough cash reserves to go several months with no business. Now, I know some gyms, they opened up their doors and they had the people working outside. And even the hair salons, they could cut people's hair outside. But the amount of people going to them is way lower than what they're used to when people could come inside and get what they needed done. And also, we need to point out this is summertime. When winter comes, going outside might not be an option. It'll be okay here in California, but back home in Vermont, I don't see that happening. Now, restaurants, if they could provide food to go or deliver food to their house, that helped. And some restaurants, they're not set up for this, so they took a major hit and they tried to have the experience of dining outside. But again, wasn't the same as if people could go into the building and eat there like normal. So even the restaurants are hurting. And I know several restaurant owners, and the stimulus package that first came out, that helped a lot. That covered them for a couple months, but we're now back, just like the W, we're now back to where that stimulus has worn off. It's gone. And they definitely need some help. And if we have a second wave, which is predicted, without a vaccine, those businesses are in trouble, and I don't see how they can recover. But let's talk about this a little more. Cheers. Now, in terms of a vaccine, unfortunately, history is not on our side. If you look back to the 1918 influenza flu, that pandemic, there were 3 waves that hit the United States, and the pandemic lasted over a year, and there was no vaccine. So basically, the people got through by herd immunity. The U.S. has several companies working on a vaccine now, and they say that one will be available by the end of the year. But normally vaccines take 4 years to develop, and usually vaccines and new drugs fail in stage 3 trial phase. And that's currently where we are right now with our vaccines. So obviously plan A is develop a vaccine, but what is plan B? Well, the way I see it, we have 2 roads that we can go down for plan B. I am making the assumption that the second wave is larger than the first wave, and it happens at the end of the year, and we don't have a vaccine. All right, so one road, like we did before, we shut down the businesses, and we recover from the second wave, and then we open back up. Or the other road is that we don't shut down the businesses, and we try to ride out the second wave. Now, let's take a look at both of these. I need a drink. Cheers. So we're going to first look at the one where we shut down the businesses through the second wave, and once we recover from the second wave, then we can open them back up. Now, I'm saying that people can't go into businesses where they're grouped together, right? So again, this is the airlines, the gyms, the restaurants, the salons. These all have to be closed. But if you have a job where you can work from home, well, nothing's going to change for you. It's only the businesses where you have to go in to do your job. Those are the ones that are going to be hurt when the government forces them to shut down. It's predicted that possibly 50% of small businesses, these mom and pop shops, they won't make it through a second wave if we have the closings. I mean, they're struggling right now because of the first set of restrictions. Without another stimulus package, small businesses can't produce enough income to cover their salaries, the taxes, the rent, any benefits. Unless something is done to help them get through these hurdles, a lot of them won't make it. So by playing it safe and shutting down the businesses, you have to keep the virus from spreading. We end up hurting and possibly bankrupting a large portion of the small business community. All right, is there a better way? Well, let's look at the other way of doing things, and, hopefully that one works. Cheers. Okay, so the other road is that we don't shut down the businesses, and we hope that we can contain the spread of the virus. And again, I'm assuming there's no vaccine, and we're counting on social distancing and wearing a face mask to protect us from the coronavirus. So how bad can that get? The problem is with this method that we've seen in the news that people don't like the social distance. They don't like to wear a face mask. So we're really counting on herd immunity. And herd immunity is when enough people get the coronavirus and then they recover and they have antibodies in their system so they can't get reinfected by the coronavirus. The only way to have herd immunity is at least 70% of the population recovers from getting the coronavirus and develops antibodies. The problem with this is that the coronavirus has a 3% kill rate. Now, I know Dr. Fauci from the CDC said that the death rate for the coronavirus is about 0.6%. So how did I come up with a 3% death rate? Well, I took the number of people who died from the coronavirus in the U.S. and divided it by the number of people who got infected. It works out to be 3%. And I did it again. I took the number of people who died in the world and then divided that by the number of people who got infected in the world, and that's also 3%. So for now, I'm going to use 3%. But, but most likely Dr. Fauci is right and I am wrong, and so my numbers are going to be high. I like Dr. Fauci. I totally trust him. It's just that lately the CDC has been putting out information that they kind of pull back and they say they made an error. So I like math. I'm going to trust the math that's showing me the numbers. It's always worked well for me. So what does this mean? How many people are going to die then if we do the herd immunity? We got roughly 300 million people in the United States. So if 70% of them get infected, that's 210 million people. They'll get the virus. Out of the 210 people who get it, 3% of them have to die. So 3% of 210 million is a little more than 6 million people. So obviously nobody wants 6 million people to die. And I want to point out, a lot of people say it's only old people that die, right? I'm okay, I'm young, and all that stuff. But remember, the way it works out is about 80% of people 60 and older die from the coronavirus. 20% of the 60 and younger die. So 20% of 6 million people is 1.2 million people. So again, you can't just say only the old people die. This is kind of a catch-22, isn't it? Because if we shut down the businesses to prevent the spread of the coronavirus, we destroy the means of millions of people to make a living. But if we don't lock down the businesses and only trust the people to follow the safety regulations, there's a possibility that millions of people are going to die. So I don't have an answer for you, but someone in a high position in government has to make that decision. Cheers to that person. Now I can see that you're shaking your head saying, Art, those numbers are way too high. I don't believe we'll ever get to that point. And you know what? You're right. I'm not saying that this is going to happen in 1 year because that's too fast, right? The infection rate of the virus is not that fast. Let's look at it from a yearly point of view. The COVID virus, which we registered it on February 29th of 2020, and it's been averaging about 33,000 infections per day. But if you look at the last 60 days, it's more like 50,000 per day. So if we take 50,000 infections per day times 365 days, because that's a whole year, we get 18 million infections in 1 year. At 18 million infections with a 3% death rate, that means 550,000 people will die each year. And that seems about right because they're predicting around 400,000 people are going to die this year. And the coronavirus started at the end of February. So that's, 2 months of no infections. So what does that mean? That infection rate, it'll take 11 years for us to hit herd immunity to the coronavirus. And that assumes two things, that the infection rate stays at about 50,000 per day and we don't develop a vaccine. But again, it only really takes 4 years to develop a vaccine. So I don't think we have to do the full 11 years, but still 4 years is pretty tough. All right. I also need to point out one thing that we need to discuss about the COVID virus when it first hit the United States. Now, if you remember back then, our hospitals got swamped. They were covered with COVID patients. They had them all over the place. We were in dire need of PPE. We were crying for ventilators. So the death rate was probably higher than normal due to the fact that we just were not prepared for this pandemic. With that in mind, I believe we are more prepared today to handle an upsurge in patients with a coronavirus infection. So that means my numbers, again, are probably too high, and another surge of infections will be better handled. Of course, if the surge is really big, this second wave, if it's really big and it overwhelms the hospitals, well, then all bets are off. Once the hospitals are overwhelmed, the death rate goes up. Because if that gets out of hand, we're in trouble. Cheers. Well, as you can see, my beer's almost empty, so that means we're at the end of the show. I hope you enjoyed it and learned something. If you would like to send me a comment or discuss something, please email me. Also, if you like the show, please hit the like button. And if you'd like to be notified of new shows, please subscribe. But until then, keep your beer cold and your interests hot. Cheers.